Forward to it.
Thanks very much.
In your own time.
Thanks for the invitation. So, all we have today is some work I undertook back in 2015, 2016 in terms of the data collection, looking at what's happening in the repossession courts. So actually going to the courts and witnessing what takes place and maybe looking at the reality of what happens versus some of the perceptions about what it is that's thought that happens, and looking then at the actions of banks and borrowers within the court system, and in particular the circuit court. So the motivation comes from just trying to assess whether what's out there actually has any bearing to reality. We had an ongoing sequence of warnings of a tsunami of repossessions, with 25,000 homes at one stage being suggested could face repossession. By 2013 it had become so pervasive that I think this is the Irish Examiner went with 25,000 lose ownership. It had already happened. And then it was just 6 months. That such was the view that there was a level of repossession out there that was resulting in thousands of property owners losing ownership of their property. And headlines like this sort of motivated, because if this had happened, like it was the quietest wave of repossessions in history, because there was seemed to be very little objection, there was very little incident, like where were sheriffs etc. out doing these repossessions. So while the headlines had various warnings and even claims about them, it didn't seem to be backed up by what was happening. So in early 2015, I said I'd go and look and see at the repossession hearings and see what actually happens. So what we have here is a description of what happened in 26 sittings. So I attended 26 sittings and just took down and listened to what was happening. So all the information that's been collected is something that's been said in court. So it's not a complete vision of any particular situation, but it is a vision of what happened in courts. Each day there's a huge number of listings, so that's the number of cases listed for any given day. So it was over 1,800. Some of them weren't mortgage property, so I removed them from the list. So we have.
Seamus, is this a court that's specifically designated for this purpose?
So this is the Cork County Registrar. So the registrar isn't a judge. The registrar is an officer of the court, but it's where mortgage repossession cases go first. If there's no dispute about law, if it's just a matter of fact, the registrar can actually make a decision. But if there's any issue of law, it has to go before a judge. So then we'll go to the circuit court. So this is the registrar's court. So the registrar isn't a judge, but unless there's matters of law to be issued, the registrar can make a decision. And almost all of them were before the same registrar. So the ones with the asterisks was when there was a visiting registrar. This registrar was on leave, or unavailable for one reason or other. So there is a certain consistency in the decisions made. So this is at the circuit court.
James, did you just randomly pick what days you would go?
No, wait. These are all the days. These are the only days. These are all the days in which mortgage repossession cases were listed.
Oh, but you went every day.
Every day. So the court is near UCC. I didn't have far to go.
How much time for this case?
Didn't have far to go. So that's 26 sittings. Like, although there's a lot of cases, they take about an hour and a half. They don't take that long. They fly through the cases. Most cases only take seconds. You're not there all day. So a session could start at 9:30, and I'd be back at my desk 11:15. So it was quite close, and they were quite quick. So there are 26 of them. So you can get the information from the legal diary. You can see when the hearings are happening and when the cases arrive. So we have about 750 total observations from which to look at. One issue that arises is we get different number of cases. So we have 750 separate listings, but they appear once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times. They're only there for 9 months, and there's a couple of cases which appeared 5 times. So you can get an indication of what happens to these cases. So as a separate case, there was 905. So this is just Cork. 905 cases appearing in a 9-month period, given us our 754 separate listings. So you have ones that appear once. So you get to pick up a bit of history of the cases, and you get more information if you keep hearing the same case coming up on a regular basis. From the
Seamus, I'm still confused about the difference between cases and listings.
so this is like A versus B,
Yeah.
and this is A versus B listed on the 23rd of March and also listed on the 17th of April. So that would be a listing, it's on the court list.
So any caseman can have more than one listing.
Well, it can appear lots of times,
Okay.
and that's what actually happens with these cases. They come before the courts repeated basis. So like I saw 307 cases once, there was 2 I saw twice, so 368. I'll give you 706 listings.
no, I get it.
It appeared twice. It was called out in the court on 2 occasions, 3, 4, and 2 of them I saw 5 times. You can look at the number of respondents, so how many people are named, if it's an individual borrower, a joint borrower, a few cases of 3, possibly with a parent, being a co-borrower with a couple. Most of them, the highest number were joint borrowers. We're still looking at 40% being single respondents, which probably maybe slightly different to the overall mortgage market as a whole. Would you expect 40% to be single borrowers? When the cases were issued, so the case listing has a year at the start, and some of the cases are quite old, but in the main you're dealing with cases that arose in 2013, 2014 and 2015. So that's when the court proceedings were first filed. So the issue is what happens? 750 listings, 900 cases, tsunami repossessions on the way. What happens when these cases are called out? In a lot of cases, nothing. So I was there for 228 cases where notice hadn't been served. They couldn't find the borrower. Even though it's on a property, I think finding the borrower would be somewhat easy, but they couldn't find them. Property is vacant, abandoned, person won't open the door, person's in Australia. So the case would be listed, and you can't have a civil proceeding against you unless you have been served notice that the case is proceeding. So the case comes before the court, it's called out, and the applicant, the bank, has to say, notice not served. So nothing happens, it's just put back for a later date. And 152 times that the bank struck the case out. So there's no need to proceed here.
Why would they do that?
So of the ones that were struck out,
Oh, sorry.
the vast majority were struck out because a restructure was agreed.
Okay.
Person has back pain, so a restructure agreed, the arrears were cleared, the arrears were capitalised, the loan was cleared, a term extension agreed, the person resumed payments. So you got back on track or started making payments, and there was no longer a need for the case to proceed. So I got that information about half the time, about why the case could be struck out. 87 times it wasn't said at all. So you're very much dependent on what's said. And these cases only last a second, so you're there with a pen and paper trying to tick various boxes as to what's happening. So a lot of the time nothing happens. Either the person hasn't been found, or for a variety of reasons the case will be struck out. Sometimes the lenders have a choice. The applicants, the lenders, what are they going to do? We've seen that about 380 where they can't do anything. What we find in most cases is that they're adjourned. This is why they appear multiple times. The case comes up and the bank just asks for an adjournment. Sometimes it's forced on them. In about 2014, the president of the circuit court issued a practice direction which mandates that the first time a mortgage repossession case comes before the courts, it has to be adjourned. So it's been served, comes before the court, it'll be adjourned, and then we'll come back in 5 or 6 months' time. So the banks can do nothing on the first day. So they're actually forced to adjourn. This is why some of them are fairly quick. And then the banks themselves apply for adjournment. So they've issued these legal proceedings. They said, I want to sue you for the ownership of a property, but over half the time they come in, quarter of the time they have to have an adjournment, and over half the time they ask for an adjournment. So of our 1,374 active listings, over 80% of them are to seek an adjournment, and only 18% of the time, 1 in 6 on occasions, does the bank proceed with an application for possession order. So you have 100 cases listed, you're only going to get 17 or 18 of them where the bank actually says, can I get a possession order? So either the court are adjourning them or the lender is adjourning them. The bank has chosen to to strike out in a small number. There was actually 3 cases where a case was called out and there was nobody there. There was silence. There was nobody from the bank or nobody from the lender side. And they just move on. But like the banks aren't very well organised. So that possibly isn't a surprise. But on very few occasions do they look. Why do they look for adjournments? Well, again, the starting reason is the court says it. So is this the first time it's been listed? That could be adjourned. Why do the banks seek adjournments? Again, it's a bit like the cases that are withdrawn. Alternative repayment arrangement. The borrower backs it, but I'm not saying they'll strike out the proceedings. We'll come back in 6 or 9 or 12 months' time to see what's happened. Maybe additional information. There may be a change to amend the civil bill if the bank changes name or the owner changes name, and other minor issues. But by far the biggest reason is for a alternative repayment arrangement. So these aren't necessarily people who are not paying anything. So there are issues about all this work that the courts are doing and how few times the banks are actually looking for possession orders. Hundreds of cases listed, and yet most of the time they're just looking for an adjournment. So what are the borrowers doing? Well, most of the time they're not even there. The first time I went, it was a bit like this. There was a few legal people there, hundreds of cases listed, and very few, tiny little room. A room that might only take 20 or 25 people. And I thought I was in the wrong place. Because in the vast majority of cases, the borrowers are absent. Not there at all. So notice has been served, they know it's proceeding, but they're not there. 12% of cases, the borrower is present. Another 12%, the borrower is represented by somebody. It could be legal representation, MABs, insolvency service, some of the mortgage groups, on some of the more fringe elements, Freeman type defences. On rare occasions, they're both there and represented. So that gives us the overall presentation. We can't really blame people who've not been served for not being present. Either they're avoiding having notice served on them or they haven't had it served on them, so we can't say that they're not showing up. That's another 13%. But the most common outcome is for the borrower not to be present.
Or to be represented.
Or to be represented.
Not taking part.
Not there at all. So you have the agent for the bank stands up, says what's going on, and there's nobody else there.
Well, but there's no consequences for the borrower if they don't turn up. It looks
They can't make their case.
so, but they.
It's not a tactic, is it? Is it, you
Yeah.
know, like I'm going to keep this to touch for the moment by not turning up. And
No, I think as we'll show, you're actually better off turning up.
Okay.
But if you look and see, like, are they being negligent, the borrowers being negligent in what they're doing? Well, if you look at what the bank are going to do, maybe we see a slightly different behavioural pattern. That it's possible that the borrowers know what the bank is going to do, so they then decide whether to show up or not. So like when the bank are going to strike out, for one reason or another, the borrowers are absent 90% of the time. When the bank is going to adjourn, they're absent 74% of the time. If it's the practice directive's adjournment, maybe they're not sure what's happening. Actually, they're only absent 66% of the time. For other adjournments, they're absent almost 80% of the time. So if they know nothing's going to happen. Whereas if the bank is going to proceed, actually the absent rate drops to 40%. When the bank is going to proceed, they're either present, represented, or both. So although there's a large number of them absent, it may be that the borrowers just know more than what we knew about what was going to happen. So if the bank is choosing to proceed, and that means look for the application or look for the possession order, tell the county registrar, I want an order for possession of this property, well then the absent rate drops to 40%. So they do actually show up a bit more when it's possible that something is going to happen. It's just,
Is your assumption there is that everybody knows in advance what's going to happen?
could be, I didn't say that I did.
Right.
Like just given the pattern here, that the absence rate changes by the actions of the bank. I'm assuming you get a letter or some notice in advance, some engagement with the bank of what's going on. I don't know, I don't see that. But just given that when the bank are going to proceed, the absence rate drops down below half, it does suggest that the borrowers have some information. And that maybe this isn't as bad as it might appear up here. When they say 60% of the time they're absent. Like if they're absent and nothing is going to happen, it mightn't be harming their case. It might necessarily be a case of doing nothing. So then what happens? We know what the banks are trying to do. that mainly adjourn. They're looking for orders about 1/6 of the time. And we have the borrowers being present. And then we have to see, well what actually happens? How many orders did they get? So new return date is the cases with notice not served. Come back in a few months and tell us that we found the borrower. The case struck out. Adjourn generally is adjourned with no date in the future. So it's still in the system, but somebody has to do something to trigger a date. It's not going to be listed for a future date. So the applicant must make an application to the court to have it listed in future. Case adjourned is with a date. The registrar can't deal with legal issues. So a small number are transferred to the judges list. And the judges list is a terrible place to end up. The judges don't have as much patience, have much more complicated lists, and tend to want to get cases off their list. They don't want them coming around again. So I went to a couple of the hearings of the judges list, but it's not worth it. You could have 40 cases listed, and 4 of them might be mortgage repossession cases. So you get great entertainment for the morning, but it takes hours. And you don't need to know about somebody shoplifting in Super Value in Glenmire. Offers nothing. So I didn't go to that too often. But the cases transferred to the judges list are where there's legal issues. So somebody makes a defence about some legal basis, and it happens very rarely. Most of them, the legal issues tend to be freeman type issues. Strange things that I think do more harm to the borrowers than anything. Because the judges are far more likely to grant orders if there's been a history of non-payment, whereas the registrar will tend to be much more benign. And then 26 hearings, 1,700 listings, 80 orders granted, so less than 5% of the time, and maybe just 1/12 of the total cases seen resulted in an order being granted. So 250 times the banks look for an order, they got it 80% of the time. Or sorry, you got it 80 times. So 2/3 of the time they fail, even after going through multiple listings. Maybe one reason why attendance might matter and might benefit the borrower is the length of the adjournment. So we'll set it for a date. So if we have a November hearing, will we come back in February, will we come back in May, will we come back in July? And if you look at the median length of the adjournment in days, so for all adjournments, the median length was 118 days, so just shy of 4 months. The median when the borrower was present, the median when the borrower was absent was 118 days. The median when the borrower was present was 147 days. So you're getting an extra month. If you're not paying your mortgage, an extra month might be of value, or if you're trying to get back on track, an extra month might be of value. So being present does seem to have an impact. They seem to have a set date in mind for those that are absent. Bring them forward in 3 or 4 months' time. If you're present and can tell a bit of a story, I got a job, I'm trying my best, I'm making repayments, bank aren't listening to me, the court will generally be recognise that and offer a longer adjournment. So there are advantages to turning up. You can see then by different types of adjournment. The practice direction adjournment, the first day it comes up, 105 versus 153, so almost a 2 month of a difference. If the banks are looking, maybe 30 days. For the registrar, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. If the registrar decides to adjourn the case, and that's generally when the banks want the order, again around 3 or 4 months. But it does show that maybe being present has a difference. So do the banks get what they want? Are we looking at a situation where the courts are granting repossession orders on a pretty significant basis? Again, here's our 750 listings across our 900 cases, and what the banks want to do. The banks being the applicant. They can't do anything. They want to strike it out. They're not there. They have to adjourn because it's the first time. They want to adjourn because maybe the borrower is going to make repayments. And then the 250 cases where they proceed. So these listings get significant media attention, but 250 times out of the 1750 they want to proceed. So what happens if we go out? Well, 150 times they fail. The registrar says, no, you're not getting an order. So we have a mortgage, in default, not being repaid, borrower possibly not even present, and the registrar will adjourn. And so come back in a few months' time, let's see if circumstances changed. 20 times got thrown to the judge's list. So maybe the borrower was present, raised the legal defence, let the judge decide, and 80 times the order was granted. So they got their possession order in 80 of the individual listings. So you're looking at about maybe 2 or 3 orders per hearing. So it's not a massive amount. And what's interesting perhaps about being present, maybe you see people laying their lives before you, don't have an order granted against me, is that if you look at the orders granted and see what the borrower was doing when they were absent for 66 of them. So there was nobody there to say, don't let them repossess my house. 10 times they were there and they consented. They reached the end of the road and they were just there to witness it. Either they were present or more likely they were being represented. I only saw 4 instances, 26 hearings, 1,700 separate listings. 4 times was a borrower in court objecting to a repossession order to be granted and have it granted against them. So you see very little of people looking to prevent the granting of orders and failing. Most of the time, if the bank seeks to proceed and you show up, you can stop it. So the courts will be amenable to requests from borrowers for more time. Now, it may just be a short-term thing. It may be that you get more time now and then you don't turn up the next time. And you end up in this group. But some of the drama you might expect in a repossession court doesn't happen. Generally when the borrowers are present, the order isn't granted. So only 4 times, and I think there was only 1. Across all my time there was only 1 order granted that you might have had some doubt about. You might say, well, that seemed a bit harsh. Relative to what was going on. Like when we look at the outcomes of some of these mortgages, whether you view this as being harsh or not, is a subjective thing, but maybe there was only 1 instance where you thought a borrower wasn't getting a fair shake of the stick. We spoke about the number of respondents on the cases being listed. 40% of cases were single respondents, and about 60% were dual or joint respondents, and actually it's slightly higher for orders. So just over 50% of orders were granted in cases of a single respondent. Maybe issues to do with income and the ability to service a given loan. And we've gone through that. Most of the time borrowers are absent when a possession order is granted against them. So you don't get much drama. So the last bit to look at is, well, what was happening with these loans? So again, this is only a partial sort of description of the loans across all these cases. So it's based on information said in the court. So you take it, whether it's correct or not, but it is the information as given out in the court. So these are the 80 loans where orders were granted. So some of this information probably came from earlier listings. So you pick up a bit of a picture of a particular loan over a period of time. You don't get it for all 80, so the count is lower than 80, unless the information is actually said. You obviously can't write it down. But in 51 cases where an order was granted, the loan origin was given. What year was it issued? And you can see 5, 6, 7, 8, and where most of the loans originated.
So they're all negative equity.
At this stage it would have been huge loans, and we will see that. Not only are they negative equity, the loan is bigger than the amount drawn down. Like, these are deep in the hole. The first default, generally 2007, 8, 9, 10, is when the loans first went in default. So we're dealing with court hearings in 2015. Like, these loans have been in default for a while. And in the last payment, like when did you last receive money? So 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. So in the cases where orders are granted, like it's a large loan from the boom period, where default happened early in the recession, and where the last payment hasn't been received in 2, 3, 4, 5 or more years. There hasn't been a significant period of arrears. There's been a significant period of non-payment. So these are quite cases possibly where repossession and ending loan might be the best outcome. So if you look at some of the information about the loans, so that the current balance, how the current balance compares to the original loan amount, what the required monthly payment should be, what the level of arrears is, the amount of missed monthly payments, and some indication of the amount of arrears. So this again for the 80 loans where an order was granted, where this information was provided. So these aren't all the same set of loans, so we can't compare up and down. We can look at the median. So the median balance was about €230,000. So an above average loan size. And that's the balance. And if you look at the ratio of the balance to the original amount drawn down, 1.16. So the loan is now 16% greater than the original amount. So there's no payments being made, and the interest is accumulating. And like one loan was twice the original balance. I'm not sure what the interest rate was or how long payments had been, but the loan was growing pretty rapidly. But the median is 1.16. So most of these loans are possibly not only in negative equity, actually getting deeper into negative equity as the amount owed is increasing. The median monthly payment, just under €1,000, and the median amount of arrears is 50,000. And in cases, so this is just based in cases where we've both the monthly payment and the level of arrears, so you're down to 53. But the median amount of arrears is 52 months. So missed over 4 years of payments. So there's been a significant history of non-payment. And these are instances where the order is granted. The most was just shy of 100 months. So missed 8.5 years of payments. So
living rent free and mortgage free for 8 years.
8.5 years, yeah.
I think it's stressful, I think.
So what do people learn from? If they know something will happen.
Oh, yeah, so I think there's response issues here.
Yeah, do you think there's any?
Yes. And you have people coming into the court who haven't paid in 5-6 years, come in and say, I'll start paying next month. Cases adjourned for 5 months, it comes back and they haven't been heard of. So they got 5 or 6 years and they get another 5 or 6 months. That's my view. Like, you don't see them the second time. But the court does tend to take a relatively lenient view on borrowers when they show up. That if the borrower says they're going to repay, the court has no reason not to believe them. Then the bank comes back in a few months' time and says they haven't paid, and then the order is granted. But it is availing of the service without paying, and these are significant amounts of arrears. Like, if you look at arrears in Ireland and you try to make comparisons, like one thing in broader versions of the work is to look at the level of arrears in Ireland. You can't compare with other countries. Like, we've data for accounts that are 2 years or more in arrears, and we say, well, Spain had a mortgage crisis. Can we compare that? They don't have the data because it doesn't happen. Like, they don't have arrears of that length to make it worthwhile for them to collect accounts that are more than 2 years in arrears. Like, they go to 90 days, possibly up to 180, maybe 360, and then they stop and say, well, that's it, sure, the thing has to have ended by then. Whereas if you look at our arrears data, like, what we actually need the central bank to do is actually to not have 2 years being the catch-all category at the end. We need a 4-year plus category to get more granular information about what's happening because of instances like this, the scale of the arrears and the amount of it. And then when an order is granted, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the process. In almost all cases, when an order is granted, a stay will be imposed. So you can't do anything while the stay is in position. You have to wait until the stay is ended. In the main, half the orders were granted with 6 month stays. So nothing could happen until that 6 months have passed. So even if they are going to repossess, it is gone. And the longest was 18 months. So whatever the incentive to stay to pay is, maybe without a repossession order, if you know nothing can happen, maybe that can further reduce the incentive to pay. But even with the orders, and 80 of them granted, not all orders are executed. Because we said if at the start the banks can strike out or adjourn because the borrower can start repaying. Even after this, maybe now the incentive is getting stronger to pay. When the order is granted, you can get the borrower coming back saying, okay, maybe you're serious now. You've got through the court, you have your order. You can look at the orders being executed. And we've very little information on this. We've some for Cork and Dublin, because both Cork and Dublin have sheriffs a separate person whose job it is to execute the order and gets, I don't know, 2-3% of the value, so is possibly doing quite well out of it for orders are executed. But around the country, for all the other counties, they don't have sheriffs, and the person who is supposed to execute the orders is also the registrar. So the officer of the court is also the person who's supposed to execute the orders. And I think we have very little information about what happens there. And as a civil servant, are they too keen to go out repossessing properties? Maybe require security, etc. So the level of repossessions, the sheriffs in Cork and Dublin will tell you, those repossessions are quite low, and almost all the time they go there, properties are vacant. It was either vacant to begin with or the person is gone. So it happens with very little interaction, but the numbers are quite low. So even though you look at the orders granted, not all of them are executed. The courts tend to deal with all properties. So when it was set out, like most of them were principal primary residences. I think one of them was a holiday home, and 10 of them, it was indicated they were buy-to-lets. With most buy-to-lets, the borrowers don't have to go to court. It's in the contract that they can appoint a receiver, either a rent receiver or a sale receiver, if the loan goes into default. But some of the banks were terrible back in the day and had very bad contracts and couldn't even appoint receivers, so they had to go to court. But most of the properties at question were principal primary residences, and when the occupancy status was stated, which wasn't too often, but 17 of the properties were vacant. And this is just when the case is in the courts. This isn't after the order. This is while the case is in the courts. So either the person has moved on, it could be a relationship issue where both people have split, or the couple has split and both have left the property, or it could be to immigration. There was a number of veiled references to trying to find borrowers that had left the country. So maybe 22 isn't that representative of the 80, but of the 22 where the status was given, 17 of them were vacant. There was nobody to kick out. They weren't there, and to all intents and purposes had given up on the property. Then the final issue is those instances where the orders were refused. So the banks came in, had their paperwork in order, had their story ready for the registrar. This is loan X, default Y, payment since X, granted the repossession order. So this is just the same information on the set of loans where orders were refused. In many instances, no borrower there. This is the information the bank represents or presents to the court, and the order is refused. So when the loans were drawn down, smaller numbers, but again, boom time loans, 2008, 2009, when they went into default, and when the payment was last made. So I was in court in 2015. There was one instance of a bank applying for a possession order on a loan where nothing had been repaid. Was 2009 or 2008? I think it's 2008, is it? Oh my God, is it? Yeah. 2008. So nothing, zero. The last payment received was 2008. I'm assuming the borrower was present and was able to prevent the order being granted. 7 years of zero. 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So there's nothing being paid for a number of years, and still the order was refused. For one reason or another, registrar not happy with something, the borrower present, the borrower says they're going to pay. It's like when you can go each year without payment, turn up in court and still avoid a repossession order, it suggests that things are more benign maybe than the headlines would suggest. Then just looking at whether these loans are actually a bit better, it might tend to be so that the current balance is higher, but the ratio of the current balance to the loan amount is a bit better. So the amount of negative equity could be a bit less. They're at least stopping the loan from going up. Maybe they think they have some hope that if they can actually get back paying, they can bring the loan down. So these ratios are much higher for those where the order were granted. They were deep in negative equity and getting even deeper as the loan amount was increasing. The mortgage payment again around 1,000, although the level of arrears was again pretty substantial, a median amount of about 4 years. But the difference is on the ratio of the current account, or the current balance to the loan amount.
The order is refused by the court.
The court, yes.
Yeah.
So the bank comes in and says, make an application for a possession order. If the borrower isn't there, the registrar can ask questions. The loan, when was the last payment made, what's the level of arrears, when's the last contact with the borrower, has the borrower submitted a standard financial statement. If the borrower is there, then you actually get more information when the borrower isn't there. Because when the borrower is there, then you just get the emotion. I'm trying my best. Whereas if the borrower isn't there, like the representative of the bank just has numbers. There's no story. So you can get all these numbers. Whereas if the individual is there, the registrar probably go to them much quicker. The bank will just get the words out, making a possession or application for possession order, and the borrower will stand up, and we'll get the story from then as to what may or may not happen. So what does listening to 26 or 27 hearings give? Well, it gives a big data set of outcomes, not complete because they're dependent on the information being provided. So there's lots of hearings and cases. This is just Cork. This happens in every county around the country. I've come to Dublin a couple of times and I've gone to the equivalent court in the four courts, and it's pretty much the same. No one there, lots of cases, all adjournments, turn up and you get adjourned. So I think it's very hard to make a generalisation across the country, but the pattern in Cork is reflected in what's happened in courts right around the country. Whether that's been informal or formal, it's hard to know, but the courts are granting relatively few orders. Relative to the amount of cases, the amount of listings, the hearings, and the noise out there, orders are being granted, but it is in very extreme cases. Huge amounts of arrears, borrowers not present, and not making payment. The evidence would suggest that attendance does matter, that you can get a longer adjournment if your case is going to be adjourned, or you can avoid the order if the bank is going to make an application. Now, maybe just a timing issue, you mightn't turn up the next time. What is the most important thing the bank or the courts tend to look for? Some payments, either evidence of recent payments or promises of future payments. In all cases, that results in an adjournment. Even when the borrower is absent. So if the court asks when was a payment made, if it was a payment in the last 2 or 3 months, the court will take that as evidence of something happening, and will almost all grant an adjournment. Despite the headlines we opened up with, there hasn't been, and I think very unlikely to be, tens of thousands of repossessions. The number might get larger just for time alone. Somebody says there's going to be 20,000 repossessions. If you give them 30 years, they will be right. I don't think they're offering any insight. They were all about much of a shorter period of time. And of course, as the economy has recovered, either repayment capacity has improved, people have decided, I can't actually service this loan, and house prices have increased. Maybe able to reach a deal with the bank or some other lender to end the mortgage, to sell the property and have more money to offset against it. So the solution has been slow, but maybe not of the worst amount. And then from the first day I went in there, I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't prepared at all. I had a blank sheet of paper, expecting to see things happen slowly. It happened so quickly. I got no data the first day. Second day I went in, I had spreadsheets and boxes to tick. I knew what I was at. But right from the first day, I was like, what is the incentive to pay? Like, what are the consequences of non-payment of a mortgage? And the consequences appear to be quite low. So is there an issue of people gaming the system? I think to a certain extent there has to be. Hard to estimate how much. But people that haven't paid in 8-9 years show up in court saying they will pay, come back in 6 months and they still haven't paid. I think you're looking at a reduced incentive to pay, and one that's possibly imposing costs that have to be borne elsewhere. So that's what happened in the Cork Circuit repossession court for 15 and 16. I don't think it's changed on the way for a couple of years, and keeping track of the aggregate data suggests it hasn't changed. Some of the players may have changed, that the banks have sold some of these loans, but looking at just glancing at the court lists in recent times, you don't see the loan owners appearing. They don't appear to be going before the courts. Maybe they consider it not worth their while. So the unregulated loan owners, the so-called vulture funds, aren't as of yet using our legal system, because they know what's going to happen and are possibly looking for other solutions. But it's a long-running thing. I don't think the end of it is in sight yet.